Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 28th daily devotion on the epistle of James. We're in James 3, verses 11 to 15 today. Does a fountain send forth at the same place sweet water and bitter? Can the fig tree, my brothers, bear olive berries, either a vine figs? So can no fountain both yield salt water and fresh. Who is a wise man and endued with knowledge among you? Let him show of a good conversation, a good behaviour, his works with meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter envying and strife in your hearts, glory not, and lie not against the truth. This wisdom descendeth not from above, but is earthly, sensual, devilish. And God will bless his word. I'd like to speak today on the two natures. Yesterday we spoke about the control of our tongue and the consistency of our tongue, and the two powers, one above and one below, that are on us. Today I'd like to speak much about the character of our tongues and the two natures that are in the life of the Christian. He said in this chapter that our tongue's like a bit in the horse's mouth. It's like a rudder on the back of a ship. It's like a flaming torch. It's like an untamed animal. But now he's speaking about two springs or two trees. And as he thinks of this dualism, a spring of sweet water and a spring of bitter water, he likens it to two mouths. It reminds us of the Proverbs that says, "The mouth of a righteous man is a well of life, but violence covereth the mouth of the wicked." A sweet mouth and a bitter mouth. There was a day when our words were bitter, when the old nature produced in us words and a character lived itself out. But the day came when we became a Christian and we tasted and saw that the Lord was good. There was a day when he put a new song in our mouth, even praise unto our God. And it changed our whole approach to how we speak. And it says in the Proverbs, the tongue of the wise is health, and we can now bring sweetness in a sad world. But as a lover of nature, James knew that the salt springs down in the Dead Sea area were different to the water that poured out of Mount Hermon. And he knew this, that you couldn't get a spring that produced salt water and then produced sweet water. That just didn't happen in nature. And he also knew this, that when you ate a fig, it was sweet, and when you ate an olive, particularly a green olive, had a bitter taste to it. And these two things couldn't be confused. And when we see people who normally speak cruel and bitter things suddenly speak with pious and holy words, we know there's something unnatural about it. And James is pointing out that those who masquerade as Christians and try to be one thing when they're not, really are exposed by their life and by their works. It reminds us of the words of the Lord Jesus Christ, "By their fruits ye shall know them." And he said he was the good tree that always bore the good fruit. There was no mixture in him. But when God saved me, he gave me a new nature, but he also didn't take away my old nature. There's no doubt about it. Now I have the power to speak wisdom and I have the power to speak good things. Paul says, if anyone be in Christ, he's a new creation. Old things are passed away. All things have become new. He says in Romans, what fruit then had you those things whereof you are now ashamed? In other words, I now can do things. I can produce fruit to God that I couldn't in the past. But I can also still speak bitter things because I still have that old nature in me. And when I begin to see in myself the good things that I'm saying changing to bitter things, I need to get into God's presence because the old nature is at work. That's why James says in verse 13 that the wise person, the person who has the knowledge of God, shows it in their behaviour. He speaks about their communication here. It's an old-fashioned word for behaviour. And he says the manner that they do it is with such gentleness. He calls it the meekness of wisdom here. And wisdom's fountain, when it begins to pour out, has this unmistakable heavenly taste about it. But he warns us in verse 14 of the awful possibility of these bitter springs bubbling up inside us. He speaks about bitter envying in our hearts. Now we can all get bitter because people can be sometimes very unkind to us. And this is just warning us to not allow our water source to be polluted. Because he goes on to say in verse 15 that this behaviour that we exhibit when we exhibit bitter behaviour comes not from the higher power of the Lord. It doesn't come from above. It comes from below. And it says it's earthly. It's not heavenly. It's sensual. That means to say it's natural. It's not spiritual. And he says it's devilish. It's of demons. It's not God. And when we realise the power that's at work, this really gets to the heart of the issue. How do we guard against these bitter springs? in our hearts. On the one hand, James says we need to be ruthless. He says in verse 14 that this bitter behaviour actually can make a mockery of what Christ has done for us. He speaks about it lying against the truth. But more positively, do you remember in Exodus 15 that in the bitter waters at Marah were made sweet by the tree being cast in? We need to get our eyes on the tree of Calvary. And as water percolates through a mountain and eventually comes out at the bottom of the mountain in a spring, so we can saturate our souls in the Scriptures and allow the love of God to fill our hearts, that we might be a reservoir of blessing to others. And brothers and sisters, the proverb says, the lips of the righteous feed many. Let us seek God's help to ensure that we're a source of blessing and encouragement to others. Now, on Monday, God willing, we'll deal with wisdom's 9 pillars.